Good afternoon all. Wayne and team, thank you for having me back. Ladies, wonderful presentation, very informative, thank you. What I want to do today, we've just got a few graphs here that paint a picture, and hopefully you find these interesting and insightful. There's not really any words on the slides, just a bunch of graphs that I'll talk you through. If you have any questions or comments, please shout out at any time. Okay, so the first one here, we're looking at insolvencies among companies that have a building license, okay? And we're specifically looking at companies that are licensed in these states and territories here. So excluding Vic, SA and Tas, but including all other states and territories. We are going to be updating this as we get the remaining 3 states licensing data in, so stay tuned for an update. But nonetheless, this tells an interesting story. So the blue bars here show total insolvencies for the year. The red line here shows for the same time period the 60-90 percentage within the BICB payment data. Okay, so if we look at the blue bars here, you can clearly see that insolvencies, sort of some yearly ups and downs, but they stayed fairly consistent for a number of years. COVID, as we all know, 2020, 2021, they dropped very sharply. So far in 2022, we've seen a clear increase. So the numbers as at the end of September are already more or less in line with pre-COVID. The shaded area there shows a projection just sort of looking out for the next 3 months. So clearly that bar is quite a bit higher than it was. And interestingly, what we see here with the BICB payment data is there was a notable increase in 2019, and Wayne, keen to get your thoughts on what you think might have been behind that. But certainly that dropped during COVID, and I think many members will report that during COVID, a lot were saying that they've sort of had record low payment arrears. Basically everybody was paying. What we're seeing now coming out of that period is the payment arrears are starting to creep up again.
Can I ask a question quickly?
Yep.
How are you? Hang on. Sorry. The projection,
Yep.
How are you getting there? Like, are you basing it on the payment days,
It's just
or
an
just looking at the
extrapolation.
insolvencies as they're flowing in, or how are you projecting
Yeah, so
those
it's just
figures?
an extrapolation for the next 3 months based on...
If they're tracking on the same rate that they currently are, that's
Exactly.
How you, yeah, right. Okay,
Yep.
cool. Thanks.
Yep. Okay, so what we've done here is we've taken the same data but broken it down by state, and the state here is the state that the companies are registered in. Okay, so most companies will be licensed in their home state, and certainly there's some companies that are licensed across multiple states, but the state bars here show the state that they're registered with ASIC. What's really interesting here is you can see in 2022 the Queensland number, which is the maroon here obviously, that basically hasn't changed at all. What's really changed in 2022 is the New South Wales number. So that one has more than doubled, and to a lesser extent the WA number has also increased. So we'll see a few nods. So does that sort of reflect what you guys are seeing in the field as well? Yep.
Yeah, I think weather in New South Wales for sure
Yep.
would be playing a major part. I mean, they've had more wet days. The customers that I talk to there, they've had more wet days than dry days. Certainly, like if you're not out of the ground, you're not working
Yep.
for half the year, so they'd play a major part for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that sort of goes to your point earlier, Wayne, about forecasting weather. And then looking at the same data but on a percentage basis, so you can see Queensland here, used to be sort of consistently 40 to 50% of building company insolvencies. It's now at 28, whereas New South Wales has accounts for almost half of them on these graphs. Again, this excludes Vic, so once we add in Vic, obviously those percentages will change. Maria?
Sorry. I just wanted to see how that data then matched with the claims at NCI, like what states you're seeing most of the claims coming through and where that sits. Because, you look at the insolvencies that have happened sort of in the last period, and a lot of it, the talk's all around Queensland and what we're seeing in Queensland and the claims and what you guys are seeing. I'm just curious to see if the claims data matches the states that,
Great question, Anna.
Take it on notice.
Take it offline.
Sorry. We'd have to get a breakdown. To be honest, I don't know what the breakdown is. We'd have to look into that, but absolutely it would be interesting to see where a lot of them are coming from. Yeah.
It's interesting as well that these are the actual just pure numbers of companies falling over. Whereas the claim stats will also factor in the amount as well. In terms of what you see in the news and the headlines, it's it tends to be the big ones that.
If we can go back to the other slide, I was just going to ask, do you think the reduction in Queensland could be that QBCC has started to step it up again? So they may not be insolvent yet, but they don't have a licence to trade. Maybe we're just waiting for that to come through, because we are starting to see more of that. So I'd love to see that overlaid, similarly to Anna's query of claims. Could we see it overlaid as well, if possible, with what's happening in that licence space with reporting obligations changing and things like that?
Oh, absolutely, and we track this monthly. So if we do see, in time to come, an increase, then that'll definitely. If you subscribe to our monthly newsletter, Maria, you will see that.
Sure, I am.
Yep, Reece.
It'd be interesting as well, like the number of registered businesses in New South Wales compared to Queensland. I think in our experience as well, there's a lot more Phoenix. There's a lot more creative accounting as well in New South Wales in regards to the way they structure their companies with different setups. So that would be interesting as well.
Yeah, and I think a part of the reason for that, my understanding, is the Queensland regime basically has over time started to weed out a lot of trusts where basically you have to have a company and you can't operate unless that specific company is licensed, whereas in New South Wales I think it's a little bit more liberal, which I think definitely lends itself to that sort of behaviour. Okay, so our next graphs here show winding up applications. So again, we're looking at companies licensed in these states and territories. So the maroon bars here show the number of winding up applications. And again, the red line here shows the BICB data overlaid on that. What's interesting here is where insolvencies have well and truly caught up to pre-COVID numbers, winding ups have not. So they're certainly trending up, but they're still a fair bit short of where winding ups used to be. Yes, Wayne?
There is a reason for that, and that's the ATO.
That's right. Absolutely, and that's coming up. Again, looking at this at a state level, you can see, Queensland again has actually dropped, whereas New South Wales makes up sort of the lion's share of the upward trend, in line with what we're seeing on insolvencies. Percentages there again, you can see the trend. Okay, this graphic here looks at court activity excluding winding ups. So you can see the different categories here. So monetary claims, building and construction disputes, other commercial disputes, and then workplace/employment type matters. What's interesting here is that throughout COVID, the total numbers didn't really change a whole lot. And I think the reason why that is these numbers here tend to track the total amount of building activity. And the total amount of building activity didn't really necessarily rise or fall sharply. Building sites are always considered whatever the terminology was, where critical, essential, thank you. So, in terms of COVID impacting work sites, we didn't really see much impact there, which I think explains a lot of these numbers. One thing that is interesting in the 2022 numbers that stood out for me is monetary claims quite clearly down. And a lot of this is basically lenders and suppliers filing monetary claims against building companies. So we know from Wayne's data that, up until recently, payment arrears had been quite low. Lenders had been quite generous in terms of working with borrowers to help them through. So we're not yet seeing a major uptick here in monetary claims, so it will be interesting to see in time how that tracks. And again, by state, there's not really sort of any notable, unlike the winding ups and the insolvencies, it doesn't look like New South Wales is necessarily dominating these numbers. Okay, here we're looking at the big four banks, and this is very interesting. So you can see the activity here pre-COVID. Basically, come March 2020, the banks stopped pursuing anybody. Everybody had a free ride. That lasted for about a year, and then at the start of 2021, the banks went back into swing, basically collecting. And that's continued more or less. That there were some ups and downs here to do with some extended lockdowns in New South Wales, but they're well and truly back in the swing. And Wayne, here is the ATO graphic. So the ATO basically stopped right at the end of 2019 and effectively did nothing for the better part of 2.5 years. And you can see the little blip there in Q3. So, and of course these numbers here reflect actual winding ups and court recoveries. So what you don't see there is all the indirect recovery action, being the director's penalty notices and the threats of director's penalty notices. So in terms of the sort of the key question, what's actually driving the higher insolvencies this year, certainly payment arrears is starting to trickle up. Court activities remain more or less the same, but the real sort of elephant in the room, obviously, is the ATO. Just out of interest, how many of you guys ask for a copy of the ATO portal as a part of your standard credit application? Nobody?
For every application.
Sorry?
For every application.
Look, it's one other, where you ask for financials or other bits of info beyond just running reports. It's another thing that you can ask for. I know a lot of contractors will request that from their subbies before they start on a job. Much like financials, some will tell you kindly to go forth and multiply. Others will sort of happily volunteer it. I sort of hear sort of 50-50 will offer it up. But it's certainly another question you can ask to get a bit of insight into have they run up a massive ATO tax bill or not. Because where you hear about these insolvencies where people say, gee, there was no pre-warning at all, I'd almost guarantee my bottom dollar that they've run up a massive ATO tax bill, and that's what's... Ria?
Do you have an example of that you could share so that if we received one, if we got one, that we would know what we were looking at to know that it was correct?
Yep. So basically, most companies, their tax accountant will basically be the overseer of their ATO portal, and the tax accountant can just basically print a running balance. And what you'll see is amount owing to the ATO. So the amount owing is one key number. Another key thing to look for is, do they have 10 grand on the same day every month getting paid, which would indicate a payment plan, for instance.
Or you can look for a lack of lodgements as well.
Exactly. Yep. So just another sort of bow in the quiver. Okay, so what is this all saying? Obviously, we've seen a spike. Do we expect that to continue? Look, I think there'll continue to be, if I was a betting man, an upwards sort of trend. I don't think there'll be a tsunami, but I think it will continue to trend, more likely to trend up and down. And I think the third point here is quite relevant, where during COVID, a lot of companies could easily get by. They didn't have to pay their two biggest creditors. They didn't have to pay the ATO, didn't have to pay their lender. It was relatively easy for them to pay their suppliers, to pay their employees, and to get by. Now that they can't get away with that anymore, I think it's really going to expose a lot of those companies, and that will then, obviously really bear out the numbers in time. In terms of looking ahead, as always, there's many variables, some good, some bad. There's sort of green arrows and red arrows, I guess, anyone's guess, but watch this space. As I said earlier, we do publish a monthly newsletter sort of summarising all this information, so that gives you some really good sort of up-to-date data. Questions? That was easy. Thank you all.
Thank you.